Every ultra runner knows something that the rest of the world often forgets. The finish line isn't won on race day. It's earned in the thousands of small decisions that come long before the starting gun. You don't wake up one morning ready to run 50 miles, 100 miles, or further. You become that person, one workout, 1 mile, one choice at a time. Recovery works the same way. Whether you're fighting alcohol, smoking, nicotine, drugs, gambling, processed foods, or emotional eating, your journey isn't about being perfect. It's about making one better decision than you made yesterday. Every addiction promises a shortcut to relief. Every finish line teaches the opposite. Lasting strength comes from doing the hard things consistently. Ultra runners know what it's like to face pain, fatigue, doubt, and the voice that says, quit. Recovery asks for the same courage. It asks you to keep moving when the road gets difficult, trusting that every healthy choice is building a stronger future. Today, it's about judging where you've been. It's about discovering where you can go. No matter how many times you've stumbled, you can always take the next step forward. 3 steps to begin your recovery today. Step 1, choose your why. Every ultra runner signs up for a race for a reason. Recovery needs a reason that's even stronger. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your children. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's simply wanting your life back. When cravings come, your why becomes stronger than your excuse. Step 2, win the next mile, not the whole race. No one runs 100 miles all at once. Don't ask yourself how you'll stay sober forever, quit smoking forever, stop gambling forever, or never overeat again. Ask yourself one question. What is the healthiest decision I can make in the next 10 minutes? Recovery happens one decision at a time. Never run alone. The best ultra runners lean on pacers, crews, coaches, training partners, and volunteers. Recovery works the same way. Ask for help. Find people who believe in you. Accept encouragement. Strength isn't providing you can do everything alone. Strength is having the courage to let others help you keep moving forward. As you listen today, remember this. You don't have to become a different person overnight. You simply have to keep taking the next right step. 1 mile, one choice, one day. And eventually, you'll look back and realize that once felt impossible became your new normal. Let's begin the journey. Welcome into Running Miles with Heart Disease, CHD. I'm your host and coach, Josh. Thanks for listening today. Today's episode is going to be about addiction, and I appreciate you guys listening. If you want the latest episodes, you can always follow, and then it'll pop up hopefully on Saturday morning around 3 a.m. or at 3 a.m. so you can get it downloaded before you get out there on the trails. So, there's a lot of different addictions. When I was younger, I guess I've been fortunate not to have too many addictions growing up. I gambled a little bit, but my philosophy was like, when I gambled, I was never happy, whether I won or lost. My thoughts were always like, if I won, I should have betted more money, and if I lost, then I would be upset as well. So I quickly realized that that's something that I don't want to be a part of. But there's a lot of addictions there, and it's definitely hard to get over those things. I think with processed foods, that's something that I think I was addicted to. And for me, which helped me, is just replacing one of the processed foods with a whole food and just doing it really slowly at a time. But it is crazy now that I have opened my eyes to these things, that like you can't get like a salad from McDonald's. Like, it's just so wild to me that like all the food places out there, and I don't know, it's just, if you're trying to eat healthy, the best spot to eat healthy is your own home, because even if you go out there and order something off a menu, it's still like you don't know if it's organic, or what they're putting in the sauce with the chicken or whatnot. So it's just, I don't know. It's definitely tough eating out. Kind of like an example, I would say, when you're, or I was eating out in Ireland. I went to Ireland for 2 weeks. Beautiful country, and my wife's family's so nice and welcoming. Anyways, we went to a restaurant, and I just ordered some chicken fajitas, but with a mushroom sauce, and they must have used cream on it, because the next day, I could barely breathe when I was running at the start. So, I was trying to, I guess I was doing dairy free for a little bit, and it worked until I ate that. So I guess it's on me. I should probably tell them that I'm dairy free now when I eat out. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I overcame processed foods. And then kind of the same thing that I think when it comes to, I guess, ice cream and cake. Like, for me, I don't feel like I'm satisfied after I eat like one piece. I have to eat like 3 or 4 pieces. And even then, I probably still want more. So it's like knowing the future before the future happens, and then knowing, well, why would I eat it in the first place if I'm never going to be satisfied? So that thinking's always helped me not dive in. And then, if you are craving like a sweet, then I always pair like dark chocolate, maybe, 80%, 70%, or 90% with some peanut butter, or coated with some nuts. Just a way to get some protein in there, not just chocolate. So that's always helped as well. But the cool thing about podcasting is you don't know who's listening. So I would say there's definitely all kinds of addictions out there. I've been blessed with heart disease. So with saying that, I've never had an alcohol addiction, and I don't drink anymore. Just because, I guess when I got into my 30s, when I drank, I would just be tired, and it wasn't fun. It would make me tired. And so it was kind of an easy decision of mine to quit alcohol because it definitely didn't give me energy, and I don't know if it, now I'm like a health nut, so now if it doesn't have any benefits, then I guess I don't want a part of it. But I think, there is a social aspect to alcohol, which will be beneficial to your health to have that socialness. But I don't know. For me, I can't do it because it just makes me tired when I drink, or when I used to. So in my 30s. So yeah, I've done that now, and I guess I don't miss it because I know it just make me tired if I drank. So, but I don't know if it's because of my heart disease, but one can imagine that it would be, is another reason why I get so tired if I drink alcohol. I'm not too sure. There's not any tests, but I guess that's just what I tell myself. So, but hopefully this episode's going to be encouraging and give you some tips. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And I'll go ahead and play the episode.
Sprint a 100-mile race, your body will literally shut down.
Oh, yeah, completely. You wouldn't even make it a fraction of the way.
Right. I mean, your muscles cramp, your glycogen stores empty out in the first hour, and you collapse long before you even reach the first major aid station.
It's essentially physiological suicide to attempt that.
Exactly. So why on earth do we treat addiction recovery, which is arguably one of the most grueling, complex neurological marathons a human being can ever endure? Like it's a 100-meter dash of pure willpower.
Well, it's a profound misunderstanding of how the human brain actually operates. And honestly, it's a dangerous one. We tell people to just say no, We treat recovery like it's this binary, momentary decision.
Like it's just a test of character or something.
Right, exactly. A test of moral character where you just summon enough motivation to stop doing a behavior. But when you look at the actual clinical research, the behavioral psychology, the brain scan...
Which we're going to get into today.
Right. That model is entirely backward.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today on this deep dive into the science of recovery. We've got a massive stack of source material today, covering everything from the neurobiology of substance abuse to the behavioral psychology of habit loops.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But the mission of this deep dive is to look at all of this through a very specific and I think incredibly helpful lens. Overcoming addiction, or even just trying to break a really deeply ingrained unhealthy habit, is exactly like training for an ultramarathon.
It really is the perfect paradigm shift. I mean, recovery is absolutely not a sprint fueled by raw motivation.
Because the motivation is just too flimsy, right?
Exactly. It burns out the second you get stressed or tired. Recovery is an endurance event. It's grueling, yes, but it is entirely possible if you understand the mechanics of it.
So success doesn't come from just one heroic moment.
No, not at all. Success here doesn't come from one agonizing moment of saying never again. It comes from consistent daily choices, extreme resilience through inevitable setbacks, and building external systems that protect your brain while it slowly repairs itself.
I love that you brought up the idea of motivation burning out, because that maps perfectly onto human physiology. I mean, think of willpower like your body's fast twitch muscle fibers.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. They're incredible for a quick sprint like running to catch a bus before the doors close, but they fatigue in seconds.
They just can't sustain the effort.
Exactly. If you are trying to finish a 100-mile race, you simply cannot rely on fast twitch fibers. You need the slow twitch fibers.
Yeah.
And in the context of addiction, those slow twitch fibers are environmental design, habit stacking, clinical support, and physiological regulation.
Yeah, you are essentially outsourcing the heavy lifting from your conscious willpower to your environment and your routines.
So here is the route we are running today. We are going to traverse 6 distinct terrains of addiction that our sources cover. We're looking at alcohol, nicotine, drugs, gambling, processed food, and emotional eating.
And what's fascinating as we go through these sources is that while each of those terrains requires slightly different gear and a different approach, The underlying neurobiology of how you conquer them, how the brain actually heals, is universally connected.
Right. So for you listening, whether you are actively in recovery, whether you are trying to break a stubborn doom scrolling habit that's, wrecking your sleep, or maybe you are just an endurance athlete looking to optimize your mental fortitude.
And understand how habits actually form.
Yeah, exactly. This deep dive is going to serve as the ultimate playbook for rewiring your brain.
But before you start any ultramarathon, you really have to study the elevation map.
You need to know what you're up against.
You do. You need to know the terrain. And to conquer addiction, you must first understand how it physically, structurally alters the landscape of your brain.
So let's get right into that neurobiology. Because it's not just a mindset issue, is it? When someone is deep in an addiction, their brain is physically operating under a completely different set of rules.
Very much so. Let's look at the brain's reward system. Under normal circumstances, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that signals reward, motivation, and learning.
So if I eat a good meal, I get dopamine.
Exactly. You eat a nutritious meal, you get a small dopamine release. You connect with a friend, you get a release. But addictive behaviors, whether it's a massive influx of a chemical substance or an engineered behavioral loop like a slot machine, they completely hijack that system.
How so?
They flood the synapse with dopamine at levels that literally never occur in nature.
It's like turning a garden hose into a fire hose.
That is exactly what it's like. But the brain is an incredibly adaptive organ, right? Its primary goal is homeostasis. It wants equilibrium.
It wants to stay balanced.
Right. So when it is constantly blasted by this unnatural fire hose of dopamine, it does the only thing it can to protect itself. It downregulates.
Meaning it removes the receptors.
Yes, it physically removes its own dopamine receptors. It turns down the volume on the receivers so it doesn't get overwhelmed by the noise.
But the devastating side effect of that is what?
The devastating side effect is that everyday joys suddenly register as absolutely nothing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Eating a good meal, going for a run, watching a beautiful sunrise, they feel entirely flat.
Because the volume is turned down too low to hear them anymore.
Exactly. The clinical term for this is anhedonia. You are left in a state where only the massive spike from the addictive substance can even register on the radar. The color just drains out of the world.
That explains so much about the apathy you see in early recovery. But it's not just the reward system that's compromised, right? I mean, the executive functioning takes a hit too.
Right. The prefrontal cortex, which we can think of as the brain's CEO, the center for impulse control, logical reasoning, and weighing long-term consequences, it becomes severely impaired.
So the CEO goes offline.
The connections between the prefrontal cortex and the reward center actually weaken. So yes, the CEO is asleep at the desk.
Making it biologically, structurally difficult to make a good decision, no matter how much you might consciously want to. I mean, you can logically know a behavior is destroying your life, but the hardware required to apply the brakes is literally disconnected.
Precisely. And while the brakes are failing, the alarm system gets stuck on.
The amygdala.
Yes, the amygdala, which is the brain's stress and fear center, becomes hyperactive. When the substance or behavior is removed, the brain is flooded with stress hormones like corticotropin releasing factor.
That sounds intense.
It is. It causes profound anxiety, dysphoria, and panic. The brain essentially tricks the body into feeling like it is in mortal danger unless it gets the substance.
And just to add insult to injury, the memory center is working against you too, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. The hippocampus. It is busy forming deep, hard-to-break associative memories.
Linking things together.
Right. It links completely neutral environmental cues, like the smell of a certain street, the chime of a text message, the time of day directly to the addictive behavior.
So to summarize this starting line, your CEO is asleep at the wheel, your stress alarm is blaring 24/7, your reward system is deaf to normal joy, and your memory is constantly flashing neon signs pointing toward the quick fix.
It's a brutal physiological reality.
It really is. But the research we are looking at also maps out the natural stages of how the brain heals from this. And this timeline is incredible to look at. Can we walk through these stages of healing?
We really need to, because understanding this timeline is often the difference between relapsing and pushing through.
Yeah.
So stage 1 is early abstinence and withdrawal, which is roughly the first 1 to 2 weeks.
The detox phase.
Exactly. During this window, the brain is in absolute shock. Dopamine is practically non-existent because the receptors are still downregulated and those stress hormones we mentioned are through the roof.
This is the acute phase where people feel physically ill.
Yes, and it's exactly why professional medical treatments and therapy are so absolutely vital here.
Because it can be dangerous to go it alone.
Depending on the substance, especially with things like alcohol or opioids, you often need professional medical detox to stabilize these neurotransmitter systems safely. The physical withdrawal can be life-threatening. You need medical support to navigate that initial shock to the system.
But assuming you get through that initial physiological earthquake, what happens next?
Then you enter stage 2, which is recalibration. This generally spans from day 30 to roughly day 90.
Okay, so months 2 and 3.
Right. The acute physical sickness is mostly gone, and your sleep cycles might finally start to normalize, which is a relief. But this is the danger zone.
Why is it the danger zone?
Because this is when that anhedonia we talked about heavily sets in. The brain's reward system is still underactive. You feel lethargic, unmotivated, and completely empty.
I was reading this part of the research, and I just kept thinking, this sounds exactly like hitting the wall at mile 40 of a 100-mile race.
It really does.
I mean, your adrenaline is gone, your body's screaming at you to stop, your energy is completely depleted, and your brain is actively telling you that you are never, ever going to feel good again.
It's a bleak feeling.
But I have to ask, if the brain is literally tricking you into thinking you'll never feel pleasure again, how does looking at this timeline actually keep a person moving forward? Doesn't knowing that you're going to feel dead inside for 3 months just sound, well, depressing?
It's a great question, but clinically, it does the exact opposite. Knowing the timeline shifts the blame.
What do you mean?
It fundamentally reorients how the person views their suffering. When you don't know the science, you hit day 45, you feel empty, and you think, well, I guess I'm just permanently broken. Sobriety sucks. What's the point?
You think it's a moral failing.
Right. You view it as a moral failing or just a permanent, unfixable state. But when you know the science...
You see it as a process.
Exactly. You realize it is a predictable, temporary biological process. It removes the shame. You can look at that emptiness and say, oh, this is just stage 2. My receptors are recalibrating. I am right on schedule.
I'm right on schedule. That is such a powerful reframe. You don't panic when you feel empty. You just put your head down and keep moving because you know stage 3 is coming.
Exactly.
So let's talk about stage 3. This is the neural rewiring phase, right? Months 3 to 12.
Yes. This is where neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, really kicks into high gear.
The brain is rebuilding itself.
It is. The prefrontal cortex starts to actually regain its strength and its gray matter volume.
Yeah.
Your executive control, your ability to pause and weigh consequences comes back online.
And cravings go down.
Cravings significantly decrease. And not just because time has passed, but because you are actively paving new neural pathways through repeated healthy behaviors.
And finally, that leads to stage 4, long-term recovery. This is year 1 to year 5 and beyond.
Right. The healthy circuits are solidified. The triggers that used to cause panic are now manageable. You've achieved actual resilience. The brain's landscape has essentially been terraformed.
And that is the ultimate promise of neuroplasticity. It guarantees that if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, the brain will heal itself. It is a slow structural rebuild.
It really is.
So we know the terrain and we know the timeline. Now the question is, how do we actually train for this? How do we survive stage 2 and get to stage 4?
The research across all these different fields points to one central strategy: building systems over willpower.
This goes back to your fast twitch muscle analogy.
Exactly. Relying on motivation is structurally ineffective. Human motivation is inextricably linked to our physiological state.
Just too volatile.
It drops when you are stressed at work. It drops when you have a fight with your spouse. It plummets when you are sleep deprived. If your entire recovery strategy relies on waking up highly motivated to be good every single day, it is a mathematical certainty that you will eventually fail.
Because eventually you will have a bad Tuesday.
You will always have a bad Tuesday. So the alternative is environmental design and habit stacking. We have to look at the basal ganglia, which is the primitive part of the brain where automatic habits are stored.
How does that work?
The basal ganglia operates on a very simple loop: cue, routine, reward. If you want to stop a routine, the most effective way is to never encounter the cue.
Oh, that makes sense.
Changing your physical and digital environment removes the visual and spatial cues that trigger the craving. If you don't see the cue, the basal ganglia doesn't fire up the urge.
And then there's the science of building new, healthy routines to replace the old ones. The sources dive into habit stacking, heavily referencing B.J. Fogg's behavior model out of Stanford and James Clear's work.
They're foundational to this.
The core formula they suggest is remarkably simple, right? After current habit, I will new habit.
It is simple, but the biology underneath it is profound. It works because of a process called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning, what is that?
Well, your brain treats neural pathways very much like trails in a forest. The trails you walk every day, like making your morning coffee or brushing your teeth, are wide, clear, and easy to traverse.
The brain uses very little energy to execute them.
Right. So when you attach a new desired behavior directly to an existing ingrained habit, you are piggybacking on that clear trail. You are utilizing an existing cue routine reward loop and context-dependent memory rather than trying to hack through the brush to build a new trail from scratch.
It's like laying out your running clothes the night before. If I want to run at 4 a.m., I don't rely on motivation to dig through my dresser in the dark while I'm exhausted. I rely on the friction-free environment I built the day before.
Exactly. The cue is simply opening your eyes and seeing the shoes at the foot of the bed.
The friction is zero. But I do wonder, looking at this formula, what happens if a listener stacks a habit onto something that is inconsistent? Like saying, after breakfast, I'll do 10 minutes of meditation.
That is actually one of the most common points of failure in habit stacking. After breakfast is conceptually too vague.
Because breakfast changes every day.
Exactly. Breakfast is a window of time. It's an event that changes depending on if it's a Tuesday or a Sunday. Cues must be highly specific, daily, and reliable physical actions.
So what's a better way to phrase it?
A much better stack is, after I rinse my breakfast plate and put it in the dishwasher, I will immediately walk to my meditation cushion. It has to be an exact physical anchor.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
The anchor has to be rock solid. And as for the timeline to make that new behavior automatic, the University College London study we reviewed completely debunks that old 21 days to form a habit myth.
Oh, completely.
They tracked people forming new habits and found it takes a median of 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. And depending on the complexity of the habit, it ranged anywhere from 18 days to 254 days.
Which reinforces the ultramarathon mindset, doesn't it?
Yeah, you are in this for the long haul.
You have to pace yourself and allow the biology the time it actually needs to adapt.
Okay, let's take this theoretical training system and apply it to the actual course. Our first specific terrain is alcohol. I like to think of alcohol recovery as a steep, grueling incline. It's a slow burn that just tests your endurance every single step.
It is a profound neurological challenge. To understand why alcohol is so difficult to conquer, you have to look at the brain's delicate balance of neurotransmitters.
Okay.
Specifically, the balance between the inhibitory pathways, primarily GABA, which is the brain's main calming chemical, and the excitatory pathways like NMDA glutamate, which is the brain's accelerator.
So GABA is the brake pedal, glutamate is the gas pedal.
Exactly. Because alcohol is a powerful central nervous system depressant, meaning it mimics GABA and suppresses glutamate, the brain tries to maintain that equilibrium we talked about.
So how does it fight back?
Over time, it adapts by turning down its own natural GABA production and significantly ramping up its glutamate production.
So it takes the foot off its own brake and floors its own gas pedal just to counter the alcohol.
Yes. So imagine what happens when a chronic drinker suddenly removes the alcohol. The brain is left in a state where the natural brakes are barely functioning and the gas pedal is stuck to the floor.
Wow.
It is a hyperexcitable, anxiety-ridden, and physically dangerous state. This is what causes the tremors, the panic, the insomnia, and in severe cases, seizures.
Because the brain is just running way too hot.
Recovery is brutally hard because not only are you dealing with this neurochemical chaos, but the prefrontal cortex, your decision-making center, has been compromised by the toxicity of chronic alcohol exposure.
This is exactly why the science points so heavily to professional medical intervention for alcohol. I mean, you cannot white-knuckle your way through a seizure.
You absolutely cannot.
We reviewed the Combine study, which is one of the largest clinical trials looking at medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. The data is staggering.
It really is.
They looked at medications like acamprosate, which physically helps reset that broken glutamate and GABA balance at the synaptic level. Patients using this showed an 86% risk reduction in returning to drinking compared to a placebo.
That's massive.
And another medication, naltrexone, works by blocking the opioid receptors in the brain. So if a person does slip and have a drink, they don't get the euphoric dopamine reward. That led to an 83% reduction in heavy drinking days.
The takeaway there is that professional support is non-negotiable. Those medications act as a biochemical brace.
Like a cast for a broken leg.
Exactly. They give the brain the physiological breathing room it needs so that the cognitive behavioral therapies and the habit changes can actually take root. You cannot learn new emotional coping skills if your brain is in a state of constant sheer panic.
So once the biochemistry is supported, how do we build a behavioral system? The literature provides a framework of 10 practical actions, and I want to look at the underlying biology of them. The first major pillar is cognitive reframing, shifting the narrative from I am a bad person who lacks willpower to my brain chemistry is temporarily dysregulated.
That shift is vital because shame is a massive trigger for relapse.
No.
When you feel shame, the amygdala fires, stress spikes, and the brain seeks its preferred soothing mechanism, which is alcohol. By defining it as a biological issue, you neutralize the shame.
The next action is defining your personal reason, writing down 3 non-negotiable values. It's like knowing your why at the start line.
Right, it anchors you.
Then we have removing triggers. The advice is always to clear the home of all alcohol and barware, delete delivery apps, change your commute. It sounds basic, but neurologically, this is about silencing the basal ganglia, right?
Entirely. If you drive past your favorite liquor store, your visual cortex registers the sign, sends a signal to the memory center, which remembers the relief alcohol provided, and then pings the reward center to initiate a craving.
Just from seeing a sign.
Right. So by changing your commute, you avoid triggering that entire cascade. You are treating your environment like a mandatory gear check. If you don't have the apps on your phone, you simply cannot make the impulsive purchase during a 30-second moment of weakness.
And because you can't just leave a void, you have to replace the habit. The sources suggest mixing a complex, high-sensory, non-alcoholic drink like something with tart cherry juice, lime, and sparkling water at the exact hour you usually started drinking.
It satiates the behavioral routine.
The hand-to-mouth motor pattern and the sensory experience, but without the chemical fallout. And combining that with building a daily routine focused on aerobic exercise. Why aerobic exercise specifically for alcohol?
Because aerobic exercise naturally promotes the release of GABA.
Oh, the brake pedal.
Exactly. It biologically counters that hyper-excitable high glutamate state we discussed. It calms the nervous system down organically.
Another crucial system to build is managing cravings. They talk about sober breathing to activate the vagus nerve, basically pacing through the pain.
Yes, regulating the physiology to quiet the mind.
And accountability, your aid stations in your crew, daily check-ins with clinical providers or mutual aid groups like Smart Recovery, which focuses heavily on cognitive behavioral tools. But the part of the system that fascinated me the most was preparing for setbacks by writing a slip protocol.
It's a game changer.
Detailing exactly who to call and what to do if you lapse. The psychology behind this is to prevent something called the abstinence violation effect.
Yes. The abstinence violation effect occurs when someone has a minor slip, they have one drink, and their brain interprets it as a total catastrophic failure.
The I've ruined everything mentality.
Right. The shame overwhelms them. They think, I have no willpower, and that one drink turns into a month-long binge.
I want to reframe this through the running lens. How does a listener process a slip without feeling like they just ruined their entire race? In an ultramarathon, if you get a DNF, did not finish, it is devastating. You have to wait a whole year to try again. How does the science suggest we process a lapse so it doesn't become a DNF?
It suggests viewing it as a localized data point rather than a global failure of character.
A data point.
Think about it this way. If you are running a trail race and you trip on a route at mile 20 and scrape your knee, you don't cry, walk all the way back to the start line and say, I guess I'm not a runner.
You just look silly.
Exactly. You assess why you tripped. Maybe you were dehydrated. Maybe you were looking at your watch instead of the trail. You identify the error, you bandage the scrape, and you keep moving forward.
So a slip protocol is your injury protocol.
Yes. It forces the prefrontal cortex to analyze the slip logically. I lapsed because I went to a bar when I was overly tired rather than emotionally. It gets you back on the trail quickly.
That is incredibly empowering. And it feeds right into the final action for alcohol, which is identity change. Actively identifying as a non-drinker in all social interactions. You aren't trying to quit. You are a non-drinker. You are claiming the identity of the athlete earning the finisher's buckle.
Now, if we move from the steep, slow incline of alcohol to our next terrain, We look at smoking and nicotine addiction, and the pacing here is totally different.
How so?
If alcohol is a grueling climb, nicotine is a series of relentless, exhausting, high-intensity short sprints.
Because the habit loop is so incredibly fast.
Exactly. Nicotine works by rapidly binding to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the brain. When it binds, it causes a massive but very transient spike in dopamine.
And so it fades quickly.
Because the spike drops off so quickly, the brain demands another hit very soon. Think about the math here. A pack-a-day smoker takes roughly 200 drags a day. That is 200 distinct neurological reinforcements of the habit loop every single day, over 70,000 times a year. The behavior becomes so deeply woven into daily contexts, driving, finishing a meal, taking a break at work, feeling stressed, that the environmental cues are everywhere.
And the brain adapts to this by upregulating those receptors, meaning it physically builds more receptors to handle the flood of nicotine.
Yes!
And the sources note it takes 3 to 6 months of sustained abstinence just to restore the baseline density of those receptors. You are fighting a structural disadvantage for half a year.
Which is why the science here so strongly supports nicotine replacement therapy, or NRT.
Like patches and gum.
Right. Using patches, gums, or lozenges isn't a sign of weakness, it is a strategic tool. It provides a slow, steady stream of nicotine that satisfies the brain's excessive receptor demands, which prevents the acute withdrawal panic.
It takes the edge off.
But crucially, because it breaks the hand-to-mouth motor action and the rapid spikes associated with inhaling smoke or vapor, it allows you to decouple the chemical addiction from the behavioral habit loop.
You tackle the physical habit first, while the patch handles the chemical demand, and then you slowly taper the patch. It's brilliant. So looking at the 10 practical actions for nicotine first, admit without shame. Recognize receptor upregulation is a physical adaptation.
Not a weakness.
Second, define your personal reason. Track financial savings and lung capacity improvements. Third, remove triggers. Throwing away every lighter, every ashtray, every hidden vape.
Get it out of the house.
And fourth, make the behavior harder. I love the strategy of declaring your home and your car strictly smoke-free zones. If you want to smoke, you have to physically go outside in the cold or the rain.
Adding that physical barrier weakens the automaticity of the habit. Your basal ganglia can't just mindlessly light up while you watch TV. It forces the prefrontal cortex to wake up and acknowledge the action.
Fifth, you have to replace the habit, using toothpicks, stress balls, or chewing gum. Your hands are going to feel empty, and that physical absence is a powerful trigger. You have to occupy the motor pathway.
It's vital.
Sixth is building a daily routine. Habit stacking is huge here. If your brain strongly associates morning coffee with a cigarette, that cue is going to hit you like a freight train every morning.
You have to hijack that trail.
Right. Stacking a 2-minute stretching sequence or stepping into the shower immediately after your morning coffee to replace the smoking routine.
It rewires the morning.
Seventh is managing cravings. And the tool I found most fascinating for managing the acute nicotine cravings is a physiological hack called the physiological sigh. Can you explain how this works?
The physiological sigh is a specific breathing pattern. It's a double inhale through the nose, so one long inhale followed by a sharp, quick second inhale to fully expand the alveoli in the lungs, followed by a long, slow, extended exhale through the mouth.
Why does that specific?
Because it acts as an immediate biological override for the nervous system. When nicotine craving hits, it often presents as acute stress. Your heart rate goes up, your chest tightens. The physiological sigh physically offloads carbon dioxide and mechanically stimulates the vagus nerve.
So it calms you down.
It directly hacks the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering your heart rate instantly.
It's like reaching the top of a brutal hill sprint and finally catching your breath. You consciously force the body to calm down. It buys your prefrontal cortex just enough time, those crucial 10 seconds, to step in and say, we are okay. We don't need to smoke to survive this moment.
Exactly. It breaks the panic cycle.
Eighth is accountability. Registering with a national quit line. They act as your remote pacers, checking in on you.
They're a great resource.
Ninth is preparing for setbacks. And the sources mention a really interesting clinical protocol called preloading.
Yes. Some studies suggest wearing nicotine patches for a couple of weeks prior to your official quit day.
Wait, wearing a patch while you're still smoking?
Yes, under medical guidance. It begins the process of receptor saturation and can ease the physiological drop when you finally put down the cigarettes, making the transition less jarring.
That's fascinating. And 10th, it all culminates in identity change. Focusing on the somatic, physical benefits, feeling your lung capacity expand, noticing your sense of smell returning, and self-identifying not as a quitter, but as someone who breathes freely.
It's a powerful shift in mindset.
Let's transition to what the sources indicate is arguably the most biologically dangerous terrain on this course: drug addiction, specifically opioids and stimulants. If alcohol is a steep climb and nicotine is a series of sprints, this is the high altitude portion of the race.
Yes.
The air is dangerously thin, the environment is hostile, and the brain is fundamentally starved of its normal functioning.
The neurobiology of hard drug addiction is incredibly severe. Let's look at stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine. They don't just release dopamine, they force the brain to dump its entire reserve of dopamine all at once, while simultaneously blocking the brain from recycling it.
So they just drain the tank.
Completely. This completely depletes the brain's dopamine reserves. Furthermore, chronic use actually reduces the gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex. The brain physically shrinks in the areas responsible for self-control.
That's terrifying. And opioids work differently, but are just as devastating, right?
Opioids physically hijack the body's endogenous pain regulation and reward systems. They bind to mu-opioid receptors in the brain, spinal cord, and gut. When you remove them, the brain is hypersensitized to pain.
Everything hurts.
Everything hurts, physically and emotionally. The brain scans we looked at are sobering. They show that after heavy stimulant use, it takes upwards of 14 months of complete sobriety for the dopamine transporters in the brain to significantly improve and approach normal levels.
14 months of operating with a severely compromised reward system, which explains why relying on willpower here is not just ineffective, it is biologically impossible for most people. The brain does not have the fuel to generate willpower.
This is where professional medical detox and medication-assisted treatment become life-saving. With opioids, medications like buprenorphine or methadone are used to stabilize the brain.
How do they work?
They bind to the receptors just enough to prevent the excruciating withdrawal and block cravings, but without producing the intense high. But for stimulants, where there aren't FDA-approved medications like there are for opioids, the research heavily supports a behavioral intervention called contingency management, or CM.
I really want to dig into contingency management because it sounds like this cold, clinical, almost corporate term, but the mechanics of it are incredibly practical and fascinating. How does CM actually work?
CM is fundamentally based on operant conditioning. It uses prize-based reinforcement's tangible, immediate rewards to encourage objective markers of recovery, typically negative drug screens.
Okay.
If a patient provides a clean urine test, they immediately receive a voucher, a gift card, or a chance to draw a prize from a bowl.
Some people hear that and think, wait, you're paying people not to do drugs? That feels ethically weird.
Yeah.
But from a neurobiological standpoint, it makes perfect sense.
Right, it makes absolute biological sense. Remember, a brain addicted to stimulants has a severely damaged dopamine system. Abstract, long-term rewards like, my family will be proud of me in 6 months, or I'll be healthier next year, require a fully functioning prefrontal cortex to process.
And their CEO is offline.
Exactly. A newly sober brain simply cannot register those abstract rewards enough to generate motivation. The brain needs immediate, tangible, undeniable reward to fire whatever dopamine pathways are left. CM bridges the gap.
It provides the spark.
Yes, it provides that immediate spike of reward to reinforce the clean behavior until the brain's own reward system can heal and produce its own natural dopamine again. Studies show it can double the widths of sobriety compared to standard care.
It's like setting up an incredibly high-value aid station every single mile during the hardest part of the race. The runner can't fathom running 50 more miles, but they can fathom running 1 mile to get a cold slice of watermelon. You shrink the horizon.
Precisely. You manufacture motivation externally until the brain can manufacture it internally.
Let's run through the 10 practical actions for drug recovery. First, admit without shame. Treat it as a chronic brain illness requiring medical care. Second, define your reason. Carry a physical card of core life values.
A tangible reminder.
Third, remove triggers, deleting supplier numbers, obviously. But the literature stresses completely avoiding peer groups that are actively using. You cannot hang out at the barbershop if everyone there is using.
You have to stay on the marked trail. Wandering off to test your willpower is catastrophic.
Fourth, make behavior harder. Creating extreme friction establishing joint bank accounts with a trusted crew member, like a parent or counselor, so you literally do not have immediate access to the cash required to buy drugs.
You are building guardrails over the cliff edge.
Fifth, replace the habit. Scheduling intensive exercise during the specific hours you historically had the highest risk of using. Because the dopamine system is so starved, intense physical exercise naturally upregulates endorphins and dopamine.
It provides a healthy endogenous chemical shift when the body is screaming for an exogenous one.
Sixth is building a daily routine, maintaining strict sleep and meal schedules. The underlying science here is all about decision fatigue, isn't it?
Yes, every choice you make in a day depletes the prefrontal cortex's energy. If you have to decide when to eat, when to sleep by 8 p.m., your CEO is exhausted and the impulsive amygdala takes over. A strict routine eliminates decision fatigue.
Seventh is managing cravings. And inevitably, acute panic and cravings will hit. And the sources offer a fascinating somatic tool for this, triggering the mammalian dive reflex. I love this one. How does holding ice cubes or splashing ice water on your face help a drug craving?
The mammalian dive reflex is an evolutionary adaptation. When a mammal's face hits cold water, the brain assumes it is diving underwater.
Like a seal.
Right. It immediately slows the heart rate and shifts blood flow away from the limbs and toward the vital organs to conserve oxygen. It forces an immediate, massive parasympathetic nervous system response.
So it shuts down the panic.
If someone is having a severe craving or a panic attack, splashing ice water on the face essentially forces the nervous system to reboot.
It is exactly like dumping a sponge of freezing ice water on your head at an aid station when you're overheating in a mid-July race. It is an immediate, unavoidable physiological override that snaps you right out of the panic state. You can't think your way out of a panic attack, but you can shock your physiology out of it.
It's a very powerful tool.
Eighth is accountability. Participate heavily in group counseling and contingency management. Ninth is prepare for setbacks. Establish emergency medical contacts and immediate relocation strategies, knowing exactly where you will go if a living situation becomes compromised.
You have to have a bailout plan.
And 10th, identity change. Embrace a lifestyle centered entirely on holistic wellness and continuous growth. You aren't just surviving, you are training for an entirely new life.
That brings us to our fourth terrain, which is fascinating because it involves no physical, ingestible substance at all.
Gambling addiction.
Yes. Think of this as a highly technical, treacherous psychological descent. It's a free fall that hacks the brain just as fiercely as cocaine or alcohol, but entirely through behavior.
It is incredible how powerfully a behavior can alter the brain's architecture. The engine-driving gambling addiction is something behavioral psychologists call the variable ratio schedule of reinforcement.
The B.F. Skinner pigeon experiment.
Exactly. If a pigeon pecks a button and gets a pellet every single time, it gets bored. If it never gets a pellet, it stops pecking. But if it gets a pellet at random, unpredictable intervals, maybe after 3 pecks, maybe after 30, it will peck the button obsessively until it dies of exhaustion.
The human brain works the exact same way. The unpredictability is the hook. When you don't know when the win is coming, the anticipation of the reveal causes massive dopamine surges.
Just the anticipation.
Brain imaging shows that the dopamine spikes highest while the roulette wheel is spinning, not when it stops. The brain becomes addicted to the anticipation itself.
And that biological hook is compounded by a whole web of cognitive distortions.
Right. The prefrontal cortex gets hijacked by logical fallacies. The gambler's fallacy is a major one. The belief that a win is due because you've had a streak of losses.
You know, the illusion of control.
Yes, where a gambler thinks blowing on the dice or picking their own lottery numbers somehow influences entirely random probability. This leads to the phenomenon of chasing losses, where the person gambles more and more aggressively to recover what they lost, leading to a vicious, accelerating downward spiral.
The science of recovery for gambling heavily relies on cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, because it directly targets and dismantles those specific cognitive errors. The research shows CBT can reduce gambling cravings by 58% over 6 months.
It's highly effective.
They also utilize exposure therapy, sometimes even using virtual reality, to safely expose the brain to the sights and sounds of a casino to desensitize the amygdala's response. So practically, let's look at the 10 actions to build a system against this. First, admit without shame. Reframe it as a behavioral loop, not a moral failure.
It's biology, not character.
Second, define your reason. Document the exact financial and emotional costs. Third, remove triggers. Installing comprehensive blocking software on all devices is step 1.
Environmental design is paramount here.
Fourth, make behavior harder. And the most effective structural barrier is registering for voluntary self-exclusion, or VSE.
This is huge. This is a legal agreement where you ban yourself from casinos or online betting platforms. If you try to enter, you can be arrested for trespassing. and any winnings are confiscated. It makes the behavior practically impossible.
It's the ultimate friction. And on a daily basis, physically leaving your credit cards at home, if you only carry $20 in cash, you literally cannot lose more than $20, no matter how strong the urge gets.
Exactly.
Fifth, replace the habit. Gambling provides intense, high-stakes stimulation. You can't replace that with knitting. The sources suggest engaging in highly stimulating strategic hobbies that involve zero financial risk like competitive chess, intense video games, or rigorous physical sports to scratch that cognitive itch for strategy and adrenaline.
You need an outlet for that energy.
Sixth is building a daily routine. Secrecy is the oxygen of a gambling addiction, right?
It absolutely is. You have to outsource your financial oversight to a trusted family member, give them access to your bank accounts. When you know someone is looking at the ledger, it engages the prefrontal cortex's awareness of social consequence, which acts as a powerful brake.
Seventh is manage cravings. When the acute urge hits, that sudden, overwhelming need to place a bet, there is a specific cognitive tool delaying the urge, waiting exactly 10 minutes before acting on an impulse.
Yes. The urgency of a craving is generated by the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. It demands immediate action. By forcing a strict 10-minute pause, you are forcing the neural processing to shift from the panicked limbic system back to the rational prefrontal cortex,
giving it time to catch up.
10 minutes is usually enough time for the logical brain to evaluate the consequences and talk you down.
That 10-minute delay connects so perfectly to ultra-running wisdom. There is an old saying in the sport, never quit in the dark and never quit going uphill. Wait 10 minutes, eat a gel, and see how you feel.
I love that.
When you are climbing a steep grade at 2 a.m., your emotional brain is screaming at you to drop out of the race. It feels like an emergency. But if you just sit on a rock for 10 minutes, let your heart rate drop, and get some calories in your system, the logical brain comes back online and says, actually, my legs are fine, I just needed a minute. Delaying the decision saves the race.
It's a perfect parallel. You just have to outlast the acute emotional spike.
Eighth is accountability. Attend Gamblers Anonymous. Ninth is prepare for setbacks. Set firm, unbreakable budget boundaries to prevent a minor slip from becoming a catastrophic binge.
Build a sturdy system.
And 10th, identity change. Identify as someone who deeply values financial peace and security over the cheap thrill of probability.
That's a profound shift.
Now we move to a truly unique challenge on our course, the fifth terrain, processed food addiction. This is incredibly complex because you can quit alcohol, nicotine, drugs, or gambling entirely. You can live a long, happy life, never touching them again, but you cannot quit eating.
Exactly. You are forced to interact with your substance of choice multiple times a day just to survive.
What happens when the aid station itself is stocked with engineered traps?
That is the reality of our modern food environment. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, are not just food. They are industrially engineered combinations of sugar, fat, and sodium in ratios that simply do not exist anywhere in nature.
They're designed to be addictive.
Food scientists spend billions of dollars identifying the exact bliss point, the precise mathematical ratio of crunch, salt, and fat that hyperstimulates the brain's reward centers while bypassing our natural fullness cues.
So your brain never knows you're full.
Things like emulsifiers and a lack of fiber mean the food dissolves instantly in your mouth, tricking the brain into thinking it consumed 0 calories. So the stretch receptors in your stomach never signal the brain to stop eating.
And the neurological impact is remarkably similar to chemical substances. The dopamine spike from UPFs causes receptor downregulation, and the withdrawal is very real. The sources cite a study showing that 58.4% of people report clinical withdrawal symptoms, headaches, extreme irritability, depression, lethargy, when they attempt to cut highly processed foods from their diet.
It's officially measured using the Yale Food Addiction Scale, or YFAS 2.0. The path to recovery here requires a systemic reset. You have to stabilize your blood sugar to prevent the physiological crashes that drive cravings, and you have to allow those dopamine receptors to resensitize.
Returning to baseline.
Over time, this restores the natural gut-brain axis, allowing the microbiome to send accurate satiety signals so you can actually feel true fullness again.
So how do we build a system in a world surrounded by UPS? Let's go through the 10 actions. First, admit without shame. Recognize that these foods were engineered in laboratories by brilliant scientists specifically to bypass your self-control.
When you eat an entire bag of chips, it's not because you are gluttonous, it's because the chip performed exactly as it was engineered to perform. Removing that guilt is crucial.
Second, define your reason. Focus on long-term vitality, joint health, and mental clarity. Third, remove triggers. You apply extreme environmental control. You clear your pantry of all highly processed snacks.
Willpower is a finite resource. If the cookies are in the cabinet, your brain is going to spend all evening negotiating with you about whether or not to eat them. If they aren't in the house, the negotiation ends. You can't eat what isn't there at 11 p.m.
Fourth, make the behavior harder. Only buy whole ingredients and implement a strict rule. Never ever go grocery shopping while you are hungry.
If you shop while your ghrelin levels, the hunger hormone, are high, your amygdala will fill the cart with high-calorie UPFs. You have to shop when your prefrontal cortex is fully fed and in charge.
Fifth, replace the habit. You swap hyperpalatable snacks for complex, nutrient-dense whole foods. If you want something crunchy, you eat an apple or carrots. You have to retrain the palate to appreciate natural flavors.
It takes time, but the palate does adapt.
Sixth is building a daily routine around meal planning. Meal planning on the weekends completely eliminates weekday decision fatigue. When you come home exhausted on a Tuesday night, the prefrontal cortex doesn't have the energy to decide between cooking a chicken breast or ordering pizza. But if the chicken is already prepped in the fridge, the decision is already made. Friction is removed.
That's a huge system upgrade.
Seventh is managing cravings. They suggest a cognitive tool called the HALT check. When a craving for junk food hits, you pause and ask, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired?
More often than not, a craving for a UPF is actually a desire to soothe an emotional state or exhaustion, not actual cellular hunger. Address the underlying state. Take a nap. Call a friend, rather than feeding the craving.
Eighth is accountability. Share nutritional goals with your household. Ninth is prepare for setbacks. Keep healthy, easily accessible emergency snacks on hand.
For when things don't go to plan.
But I have to ask the expert here, since you literally cannot abstain from food, how do you handle the constant daily exposure at office parties, restaurants, or just walking down the street?
It's true you cannot abstain from eating, but you can abstain from the specific engineered combinations of sugar, fat, and salt. You draw a hard boundary around the engineered foods.
You treat them like alcohol.
You treat a box of engineered pastries with the exact same strict environmental control and mental framing as someone in recovery treats a bottle of whiskey.
And 10th, identity change. You identify as an athlete fueling a machine rather than someone who is constantly on a diet. You build a healthy relationship with whole foods and a zero tolerance policy for the specific industrial products that hijack your brain.
It's about redefining what you consider to be food.
Which brings us to a very closely linked terrain: overeating and emotional eating. This isn't necessarily about what you eat, but why you eat. This is the internal mental game. This is when food becomes the coping mechanism for the emotional pain of the race.
This terrain is driven by a deficit in emotional self-regulation, rather than just the engineered properties of the food. The research highlights two fascinating psychological concepts here. The first is alexithymia, which is a clinical term for the inability to identify, process, or describe your own emotions.
You just feel off.
You feel bad, but you don't know if you are sad, anxious, or just bored. It's just a generalized discomfort.
And the second concept?
Poor interoceptive awareness. Interoception is your brain's ability to perceive physical sensations inside your body, like your heartbeat, your breathing, or your stomach expanding. When someone has poor interoceptive awareness, they often confuse emotional stress or physiological arousal with physical hunger.
So you have a stressful meeting at work, your chest gets tight, you feel this generalized discomfort because of the alexithymia, you mistake that tension for hunger because of the poor interoception, and you use food to get a quick dopamine hit to soothe the amygdala.
Exactly. You are applying a caloric solution to an emotional problem.
The science of recovery here points heavily to dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. The core of DBT in this context is creating a mindful pause between the feeling and the behavior. It's about building a gap where the prefrontal cortex can step in, analyze the physical sensation, and make a thoughtful decision rather than an impulsive, soothing one.
So practically, how do we build a system for this?
Step one is admitting without shame, understanding that this is a learned coping mechanism. Your brain learned somewhere along the way that food temporarily soothes emotional pain. It's an effective short-term survival strategy that has outlived its usefulness.
Once you remove the shame of that, you can start tracking the data.
Which is step 2 and 3. Define your reasoned desire to process real emotions and remove triggers by keeping a mindful eating log. Not just tracking calories, but tracking your emotional state when the urge hits. Are you lonely? Are you stressed about a deadline? You have to map the triggers so you can predict them.
Yes. And then you implement a structural friction, which is step 4, a mandatory 5-minute pause. When the urge to eat outside of a planned meal hits, you set a timer for 5 minutes before you are allowed to open the refrigerator door.
And step 5, replace the habit. During those 5 minutes, you utilize a menu of non-food coping strategies. You take a hot shower, you write in a journal, you go for a brisk walk around the block.
You give the nervous system an alternative way to process the stress hormones.
Step 6 is building a daily routine. To improve that interoceptive awareness, the sources suggest daily mindful check-ins, taking 2 minutes to just sit and scan your body for tension before it peaks into a massive craving.
I really appreciate how you framed that earlier with the running metaphor. Poor interoceptive awareness is incredibly dangerous on a trail.
Oh, absolutely. It is exactly like a runner ignoring a hot spot on the bottom of their foot. If you don't have the awareness to recognize that tiny bit of friction, stop, take off your shoe, and apply some tape early on. That hot spot inevitably turns into a massive race-ending blister at mile 60.
It compounds.
By practicing mindfulness and body scans, which is step 7, managing cravings, you are learning to read your body's early warning signals, a tight jaw, shallow breathing, before they turn into a full-blown emotional eating crisis. You learn to differentiate between the physical emptiness of true stomach hunger and the tightness in your chest that is actually just anxiety.
Step 8 is accountability. Work with a therapist trained in DBT or a trusted support group. And step 9, prepare for setbacks. If you do emotionally eat, because setbacks will happen, the protocol is to forgive yourself immediately.
Just let it go.
You analyze the trigger neutrally without judgment, like a scientist looking at data. I ate because I was lonely. You don't punish yourself, you adjust the system for next time.
And step 10 is the identity change. Moving toward viewing yourself as someone who safely experiences and processes their emotions without needing an escape hatch. Okay, to successfully navigate all 6 of these terrains, from alcohol to emotional eating, we need to talk about the ultimate recovery toolkit. The sources highlight 2 universal foundational tools that every single endurance athlete in recovery needs to master. The first is urge surfing, and the second is exercise.
Let's start with urge surfing. This is a concept developed by the late psychologist Dr. G. Alan Marlett, a pioneer in relapse prevention. It is brilliant in its simplicity, but it requires significant practice to master.
The underlying science of it completely blew my mind.
It's counterintuitive. When you are in the middle of a severe craving, your brain tells you that the urge is permanent. It feels like the craving will just escalate infinitely until you explode or give in. But physiologically, neurologically, an urge is just a wave.
It rises and falls.
It has a beginning, it peaks in intensity, usually around 15 to 30 minutes, and then it naturally subsides. And here is the crucial part that Marlett emphasizes. The wave falls on its own, whether you use the substance or not.
The wave breaks no matter what you do. So Marlett breaks the practice of urge. Surfing down into the 6 steps. Step 1, name the urge aloud. Literally say it. I am having an urge to drink. I am having an urge to gamble.
Calling it out takes its power away.
Step 2, locate it as a physical sensation in your body. Don't think about the substance, think about your physiology. Is your chest tight? Is your stomach fluttering? Is your jaw clenched?
Step 3, breathe with it, not away from it. This is the hardest part. The instinct is to fight the craving, to distract yourself, to push it away, but fighting it causes tension. You have to breathe into the physical sensation.
Relaxing into a stretch.
Exactly. Step 4, observe it without judgment. Treat the urge like a passing weather system. It is raining, you don't yell at the rain, you just observe that it is wet.
Step 5, ride the wave to the peak. Stay entirely present in your body as the intensity crests. Let it wash over you. And step 6, recommit to your core values as the wave finally breaks and the intensity recedes.
The reason this works neurobiologically is profound. Fighting a craving gives it attention. And in the brain, attention gives a neural circuit power. It strengthens the pathway. By simply observing the craving neutrally, you actually weaken the neural link between the trigger and the addictive behavior.
You starve it at energy.
You are training your prefrontal cortex to realize that an urge is just a somatic sensation. It is a suggestion, not a command. You do not have to obey it.
It's so similar to getting a massive muscle cramp during a run. If you panic, tense up, and fight the cramp, the muscle seizes tighter and the pain gets infinitely worse. But if you stop, breathe into it, accept that it hurts terribly in this moment, and just keep breathing, the muscle eventually exhausts itself and releases. But urge surfing is a skill, right? You can't just deploy it for the first time when the craving is a Category 5 hurricane.
Exactly. You don't try to learn how to swim during a tsunami. You have to practice urge surfing when the cravings are small and manageable. Practice it when you have an urge to check your phone or an urge for a second cup of coffee. Surf the small waves so that the neural circuitry for the skill is sharp, wide, and ready when the massive 100-foot wave hits.
And that brings us to the second universal tool, which we've mentioned a few times but need to explore deeply. Exercise is medicine.
Exercise is arguably the ultimate neuroplasticity hack available to the human body. When we talk about healing a brain that has been structurally damaged by addiction, sustained physical activity is the most potent medicine.
What is actually happening in the brain when we run or swim or lift weights in the context of recovery?
Mechanistically, several things happen. First, aerobic exercise dramatically increases cerebral blood flow. It forces oxygen and nutrient-rich blood directly into the prefrontal cortex, which physically aids in repairing that executive control center.
It brings the CEO back online faster.
Second, it profoundly reduces systemic brain inflammation. Chronic addiction creates an inflammatory state in the brain, which contributes to brain fog, anxiety, and depression. Exercise releases myokines from contracting muscles, which cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce that neuroinflammation.
And it directly addresses the neurotransmitter deficit, right? It acts on the dopamine system.
Yes. Intense exercise naturally stimulates the release of dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Remember stage 2 of recovery?
Yeah.
The anhedonia, where nothing feels good.
Yeah, hitting the wall.
Exercise essentially forces the brain's internal reward system to turn back on. It acts as a bridge. It teaches your brain how to find profound joy, satisfaction, and reward in healthy, effort-based activities, again, completely without the need for external toxic substances. It accelerates the healing process and the receptor recalibration across every single stage of recovery.
Okay, let's pull all this together. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, looking through a wide array of sources, clinical studies, and psychological frameworks. We've looked at the brutal elevation profile of addiction, the specific neurobiology of how the brain downregulates and eventually heals, and the rigorous systems required to tackle alcohol, nicotine, drugs, gambling, processed food, and emotional eating.
The through line across all these sources is incredibly clear and I think very hopeful. Whether you are dealing with a severe chemical dependency or a deeply ingrained behavioral loop, the brain's healing process is universal.
Every step counts.
Every healthy decision you make, every environment you design to reduce friction, every urge you successfully surf is another mile completed toward a better, more resilient baseline.
The ultimate takeaway is to focus on progress, not perfection. Lasting change, true neuroplastic rewiring, doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen from one burst of motivation. It comes from thousands of small, consistent, systemic choices made over time. You are laying down a new track in the forest, one footstep at a time.
And remember, understanding the science removes the shame. If you are struggling, you're dealing with biology. It is not a moral failing. It is a biological process that can be healed with the right systems, the right pacing, and the right professional support.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to take on your next run or your next commute. You aren't just a person trying to resist an urge. Thanks to the incredible scientifically proven magic of neuroplasticity, you are literally building a brand new brain, one daily choice at a time. You are physically changing the architecture of your mind. The next time you face a craving, don't panic. Just pause and ask yourself, is this just the old neural pathway firing off its final warning, or is this my opportunity to pave a new one? Keep pacing yourself. Focus on the systems. You've got a massive crew cheering you on.
Elite ultramarathon coach Jason Koop recently dropped a statistic that honestly, it completely changes how we view extreme athletes.
Oh, it really does. I mean, it's a staggering number to try and wrap your head around.
Right. So he estimated that approximately 30% of his ultra running clients are recovering from severe addiction.
Which is just wild.
Yeah, we are talking about 30% of a population who are willingly running 50, 100, or even 200 miles at a time.
Yeah.
And these are people who have previously battled, the absolute darkest depths of chemical or behavioral dependency.
Yeah, exactly.
Like heroin, alcoholism, extreme gambling, severe eating disorders. 30%.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the baseline epidemiological data, right?
Right.
Because in the general population, the rate for severe substance use disorders usually hovers around maybe 10%, give or take.
Okay, so 10% normally.
Right. So in this incredibly specific, highly motivated cohort of ultra-endurance athletes, we are seeing an incidence rate that is potentially triple the national average.
Triple.
Yeah. And it forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable but fascinating question, which is, what is it about running across a mountain range for 2 days straight, enduring blisters and sleep deprivation and physical breakdown? Like, why does that attract people who have survived the hell of severe addiction?
And that is exactly the question we are tackling today. So to do it, we have pulled together a massive stack of sources. We're looking at clinical journals on neurobiology, diagnostic manuals, coaching case studies, and some incredibly raw autobiographical accounts.
The personal stories are really where this hits home.
Oh, totally. I was actually combing through some of the online running communities, specifically the Ultramarathon subreddit, and the way these athletes talk about pain is just, well, it's a completely different language.
Not so.
There's this one user, they go by Couch Satraga, and they wrote something that hit me like a ton of bricks. They said, the running pain cave is downright cozy after spending time in the addiction pain cave.
Wow. That is a profound reframing of what it means to suffer. Because, the pain cave is a very common term in endurance sports for that moment when your body's just screaming at you to stop. But you have to keep moving. To call that cozy.
It's crazy. And another user in that same thread chimed in, and they were saying that, sure, running 100 miles definitely hurts, but it is, quote, all gravy compared to the sheer physical and mental torture of opiate withdrawal.
Yeah, they are literally using the torment of extreme physical endurance as a comparative baseline, just to show how agonizing addiction truly is.
Exactly. So if you are listening to this right now and you are fascinated by human psychology, or if you're looking to optimize your own habits, or, maybe you've ever blamed yourself for a lack of willpower and you just want a shortcut to being well-informed on behavioral change, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely.
We're going to unpack a specialized clinical roadmap. We are looking at the top 10 ways ultra runners overcome 6 major types of addiction. That's alcohol, smoking, and nicotine, drugs, gambling, processed food, and emotional eating.
And I think it's important to note, we are not just talking about swapping a bad habit for a socially acceptable hobby here.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. We are going to explore a profound neurobiological overlap. Because the reality is, the exact same brain chemistry, the same neurological hardware that drives someone to self-destruction can actually propel them to achieve impossible physical feats if it's harnessed correctly.
Okay, so before we get into the actual clinical strategies, the top 10 list, we have to look under the hood, right? We need to understand the engine that's driving both of these extremes.
Right, the biology.
Yeah. Why are extreme endurance sports and severe addictions so intertwined on a biological level? Like, what is actually happening in the brain?
It all fundamentally routes back to something called the mesocorticolimbic dopaminergic pathway.
Okay, stop right there. You are going to have to break that down for me, because that sounds like a password to a secret government server or something.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's build a map of the brain. The mesocorticolimbic pathway is basically your brain's primary reward highway.
Okay, a highway.
Right. And it has 3 main stops. It starts deep down in a very primitive part of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA for short.
VTA, got it.
Think of the VTA as a manufacturing plant. Its primary job is to produce and release dopamine when you encounter something necessary for survival. So like food or social connection.
So the VTA makes the dopamine. Where does it go from there?
It ships that dopamine down the highway to the second stop, which is the nucleus accumbens.
The nucleus accumbens.
Exactly. And think of the nucleus accumbens like the accounting department. It registers the dopamine and says, wow, okay, that felt incredibly good. We are logging this as a highly valuable experience.
Oh, I see.
And then finally, the signal travels up to the third stop, which is the prefrontal cortex. This is essentially the CEO of your brain.
Right behind the forehead, right?
Exactly. It handles executive control, planning, decision-making. So the prefrontal cortex gets the memo from accounting and says, okay, that was great. I am going to organize our future behavior to make sure we do that again.
Okay, so I eat a calorie-dense meal. The VTA makes dopamine, the nucleus accumbens feels the pleasure, and then the prefrontal cortex makes a plan to hunt for that food again tomorrow. It's just a survival loop.
Precisely. It's how we stay alive.
Yeah.
But when someone introduces a highly addictive substance, so cocaine, heroin, huge amounts of alcohol, or even highly engineered ultra-processed foods.
Or gambling, right?
Yes, or severe behavioral addictions like pathological gambling. What they're doing is essentially hijacking this highway. They're bypassing the natural gradual release of dopamine, and they just flood the accounting department with unnatural massive surges of neurotransmitters.
But wait, if everyone has the same highway in their brain, why does one person get hooked on a substance after a few tries while someone else can just walk away? Like, is their highway built differently?
That is the million-dollar question in addiction medicine. And it brings us to a crucial biological concept known as reward deficiency syndrome, or RDS.
Reward deficiency syndrome.
Right. RDS is a hypodopaminergic trait. Hypo meaning low.
So they just have low dopamine to begin with.
Exactly. People with reward deficiency syndrome have a chronic biological deficit. And this can happen for two reasons. Either their VTA manufacturing plant just doesn't produce enough dopamine at baseline, or they have a lower density of dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens, specifically the D2 receptors.
Okay, let me test an analogy here to make sure I'm visualizing this right. Having reward deficiency syndrome is basically like having a leaky bucket for your dopamine.
Ooh, I like that.
Right, so for a neurotypical person, their bucket fills up with the normal everyday things. A good cup of coffee, a hug from a friend, finishing a puzzle. But for someone with RDS, there's a massive hole in the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah.
So the coffee and the hug, that dopamine just leaks right out. To feel what a normal person feels, they have to turn the tap on full blast with extreme stimuli just to keep enough dopamine in the bucket to feel a baseline level of like, okay.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The bucket is constantly leaking. And the tragic part of addiction is that when an individual with a leaky bucket finally discovers a substance that fills it to the brim instantly, the relief is just intoxicating.
Because they finally feel normal for once.
Exactly. They finally feel normal. But over time, the brain tries to defend itself against this unnatural flood of chemicals by removing even more D2 receptors. It makes the hole in the bucket even bigger. This is what we call tolerance.
And this is where a chemical called glutamate comes into the picture, right? Because our sources kept mentioning how addiction causes glutamate deregulation. And that sounds like something going catastrophically wrong with the engine.
It really is. I mean, we talk a lot about dopamine, which is about reward and motivation. But glutamate is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter.
Excitatory, meaning?
It's the gas pedal for the nervous system. It tells neurons to fire, to create memories, to take action. So when someone is deep in addiction, the constant flooding of the brain completely alters how glutamate functions.
How so? Does it like push the gas pedal down?
It essentially jams the gas pedal to the floor. The brain becomes hypersensitized to any cue associated with the drug.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if a smoker sees a lighter or an alcoholic hears ice clinking in a glass, the glutamate system fires wildly. It creates this intense, almost unbearable craving and physiological anxiety.
So the dopamine is telling them they need the reward, and the unregulated glutamate is screaming, go get it now.
Exactly.
So you have a leaky dopamine bucket leaving you depressed and a jammed glutamate gas pedal giving you raging anxiety and cravings. That sounds like an absolute physiological nightmare.
It is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the core question of this deep dive. Where does running 100 miles fit into this?
Right, why they're running?
Well, extremes in endurance training engage these exact same neural networks. When you push the physical body through intense, prolonged aerobic exercise, you elevate endogenous opioids, specifically beta endorphins, and you naturally increase the binding of dopamine at those crucial D2 receptors.
People always call this the runner's high, but what you were saying is, for an addict, it's not just a high, it is literally medication.
That is exactly the shift in perspective we need to have. For a person with RDS, running is a biological intervention. Regular, intense endurance exercise actively works to fix that glutamate deregulation.
It unjams the gas pedal.
Yes, the endorphins act as a biochemical brake. The sustained effort helps to rebalance those neurotransmitters and actually forces the brain, through neuroplasticity, to grow more D2 receptors over time. It makes the hole in the dopamine bucket smaller.
And there is clinical evidence to back this up.
Oh, absolutely. Studies using animal models show that subjects who are given access to running wheels and, engage in regular exercise, they are significantly less likely to self-administer highly addictive drugs like morphine or cocaine when given the option.
That's incredible.
By releasing dopamine and endorphins naturally through the intense effort of running, the human addict can satisfy their brain's desperate craving for stimulation. They create a stabilized biological environment where their prefrontal cortex, the CEO, finally has enough breathing room to actually exercise executive control over their behavior.
If you are listening to this, I think understanding this neurobiology should be incredibly empowering because it completely dismantles the societal stigma that addiction is just a moral failing or like a lack of character.
It really is not.
It's a physiological puzzle. You are dealing with a brain architecture that simply requires an intense, sustained amount of stimulation to reach homeostasis.
And once you accept that the hardware requires extreme stimulation, you can start programming the software to fulfill that need without destroying your body. Which leads us to the first actual clinical strategy in this roadmap. Strategy number 1.
Right. Because knowing that the brain is desperately seeking this extreme dopamine fix, how does an addict take the very first step toward recovery? I mean, it can't just be a vague desire to, cut back or drink a little less on weekends.
No, absolutely not. From everything in the source material, it requires a violent psychological pivot. The clinicians call it definitive decisional commitment and cognitive identity reforeclosure.
Okay, identity reforeclosure. It sounds like a mouthful of academic jargon.
It does, but the application is deeply, profoundly personal. It means completely shifting your internal self-concept. You basically have to kill off the identity of a substance user or a helpless addict and actively construct the new identity of a healthy athlete.
Wait, hold on. Why can't someone just use willpower? We have this pervasive myth in our culture that recovery is just about being strong enough to say no. Just grit your teeth and resist. Why doesn't that work?
Because willpower is a biologically fluctuating resource. Think of willpower like a battery on your smartphone. When you wake up after a good night's sleep and a solid breakfast, your willpower battery is at 100%. You can easily say no to a craving.
Sure.
But what happens at 5:00 p.m. when you were exhausted from work, you skipped lunch, your boss yelled at you, and you were super stressed?
The battery's at 2%.
Exactly. The battery drains. And if your entire recovery strategy relies on a 2% battery to fight off a jammed glutamate gas pedal that's screaming for a drink, you are going to relapse every single time.
Right, you just don't have the juice.
Recovery cannot rely on resisting temptation in the moment. It requires an absolute non-negotiable decision made far in advance. It has to become a matter of identity.
Because if it is your identity, there is no decision to make.
Exactly. Like if you identify as a vegetarian, you don't use willpower to resist a steak at a restaurant. It is simply not food to you. It's not an option. An addict has to reach a point where the substance is no longer an option.
And the terrifying danger of not making that deep identity shift is what we see in the phenomenon of high-functioning denial. I was poring over the case studies in our sources, and it is chilling how well endurance athletes can hide their severe addictions behind a veneer of peak physical fitness.
Oh, the validation they get from society for running actually reinforces the internal shame loop.
Yes, exactly. Look at the story of Allie Bailey. She is a prominent ultrarunner who claimed world-first expeditions. She ran multi-day grueling races across jungles, deserts, frozen lakes, extreme conditions. She was literally winning ultramarathons.
Right.
But the entire time she was doing this, she was trapped in a horrific cycle of weekly blackouts, severe clinical depression, and high-functioning alcoholism. She was running massive mileage while her internal organs were basically marinating in alcohol.
Which is a perfect illustration of how physical endurance can mask systemic substance abuse. Society looks at an athlete like Allie and says, well, she just ran 100 miles across a frozen lake. She must be the picture of health. She can't possibly have a drinking problem.
And she internalizes that, using the running as proof to herself that she isn't really sick.
Right. It feeds the denial.
Another prime example from the sources is Owen Jones. Owen was running sub-4-hour marathons, which is incredibly fast for an amateur runner, while functioning as a chronic daily alcoholic. He was the classic example of someone relying entirely on willpower.
Just trying to grit his teeth through it.
Yeah, he would try to manage his drinking, taper it down, bargain with himself, and it was destroying his mental health. It wasn't until right before the COVID-19 lockdown that he finally dropped the willpower approach and made a definitive, courageous decision to quit for good.
And how did that identity reforeclosure actually manifest for him?
Well, he immediately transitioned his identity into ultra-endurance. He stopped bargaining with alcohol and started bargaining with distance. He finished the grueling 100-kilometer race to the Stones in the UK, and then, completely sober, he signed up for a 5-day ultramarathon through the Himalayan foothills in Nepal. He explicitly wrote about how making a firm, black and white decision to quit was infinitely more effective than the daily torture of relying on willpower.
We also see this mechanism vividly in the incredibly famous story of Rich Roll.
Oh man, Rich Roll's story is just wild. For those who don't know, he was a highly recruited swimmer at Stanford University, an elite collegiate athlete.
Yeah.
But his promising career was completely derailed by severe alcohol and drug addiction.
Yeah, he really hit bottom.
He did. He dropped out of the athletic scene, went to law school, and rebuilt this perfect facade of the American dream. He became a highly successful corporate lawyer, had the nice house, the cars, but behind closed doors, he was heavily dependent on junk food and alcohol. He gained massive amounts of weight, became completely socially isolated, and was basically drinking himself to death in secret.
And for Rich Roll, what finally forced the identity reforeclosure wasn't a sudden burst of inspiration, It was acute, undeniable physical pain.
Right, the staircase moment. He realized at age 39, walking up the stairs in his own home, that he had to stop halfway up because he was so out of breath. He was sweating profusely, his chest was tight, and he had this stark, terrifying realization that he was heading for a massive heart attack before he even hit 40. That physical pain and terror shattered his denial.
And what is critical to note is that he didn't just put on running shoes the next day. He had to go into a 100-day inpatient rehabilitation program just to learn how to be honest.
Right. He had to deconstruct the old identity first.
Exactly. He had to mourn that identity of the stressed out, drinking corporate lawyer and let it die. Only after doing that internal work did he adopt a whole food, plant-based diet, start training, and eventually become a legend in the endurance world.
He completed the Ultraman World Championships and the EPC 5 Challenge, right? Which is doing 5 Ironman distance triathlons on 5 different Hawaiian islands in under a week. That is just, it's superhuman.
It really is.
So for you listening, how do you actually execute an identity reforeclosure without having to wait for a near-death experience on a staircase? Like, what is the actionable step?
Clinicians advise taking highly visible, actionable steps to reinforce the new identity externally. You have to drag it out of your head and into the physical world. Write down your goals.
Like physically write them down.
Yes. If you write on your bathroom mirror, I am a sober athlete training for a 50K, you are forcing your brain's prefrontal cortex to align its daily actions with that declared identity. As Rich Roll's story proves, sometimes the pain of your current situation is the only catalyst strong enough to force the shift. You have to leverage your current misery to make the decision non-negotiable.
Okay, so that brings us to strategy 2. Let's say the athlete has made that monumental decision. They've committed to this new healthy identity. They buy the trail running shoes, they download a training plan, and they hit the dirt. But wait, we established in the beginning that they still have that leaky dopamine bucket. They still have the RDS hardware. So aren't they in immediate, severe danger of just developing a brand new addiction to running?
They are highly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Which brings us to dose regulation and preventing compulsive transfer. Because the mesocorticolembic reward pathways are identical, it is remarkably easy for an addict to swap a chemical dependency for a primary exercise addiction.
Just trading one extreme for another.
Exactly. When exercise becomes compulsive, it stops being a tool for healing and starts serving the exact same emotional and psychological role that the drugs or alcohol used to serve. It becomes an escape mechanism to numb out reality.
I was reading about Max Jolliffe in the source documents. His story perfectly illustrates this risk. He went from a severe, life-threatening heroin addiction, literally living on the streets, entirely consumed by finding his next fix, to completely turning his life around and eventually winning the Moab 240.
And the Moab 240 is a 240-mile foot race through the Utah desert. It is an incomprehensible level of physical suffering.
Exactly. And people like Max possess a hardwired biological drive for extreme, transcendent experiences. The heroin provided one type of extreme experience, and running 240 miles nonstop provides another. If you don't actively manage that massive internal drive, you aren't actually curing the core mechanisms of addiction, right? You are just changing the flavor of the behavior.
That is the danger of compulsive transfer. When exercise becomes pathological, the athlete begins to experience severe clinical withdrawal symptoms if they cannot train.
Wait, withdrawal from running?
Yes. If they get a minor injury and have to take 3 days off, they don't just feel disappointed. They experience deep depression, extreme irritability, physiological anxiety, and restlessness. They develop a massive tolerance for mileage, needing to run 50 miles a week, then 70, then 100, just to feel okay.
Wow.
And they will continue to train despite severe physiological damage, like running on tibial stress fractures, or allowing their marriage and career to fall apart because they've refused to skip a 5-hour training run.
Here's where I want to push back a little, or at least play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
How do you actually measure the difference between someone who is just incredibly dedicated and loves running and someone who is pathologically addicted to it? Because to 99% of the population, running 100 miles objectively seems crazy. So where is the actual clinical line between dedicated athlete and exercise addict?
That is a phenomenal question. And it's one that sports psychologists take very seriously. We don't just guess or use the eyeball test. We use validated clinical screening tools. One of the gold standards used in the field right now is the Revised Exercise Addiction Inventory, commonly referred to as the EAI-3.
How does a test like that work? Does it just ask how many miles you run?
Not at all. Mileage is actually a terrible metric for addiction. The EAI-3 evaluates pathological patterns based on the established criteria for behavioral addictions. It is a 48-point scale that looks at the psychological damage the exercise is causing.
Oh, interesting. So what kind of questions does it ask?
It asks things like, do you experience intense guilt or panic when you miss a training session? Are you lying to your spouse or family about how much you are working out? Have you lost friends because exercise is the only thing you prioritize? Are you training through severe diagnosed medical injuries because the panic of resting is worse than the physical pain of a broken bone?
So it's measuring the loss of control, not the volume of the activity.
Precisely. If an athlete scores a 34 or higher out of 48 on the EAI-3, it indicates a severe risk of primary exercise addiction. When an athlete hits that threshold, the sports medicine team has to step in and radically change the approach. They have to start treating the exercise exactly like a highly potent, potentially dangerous medication. It requires careful, strict dosing.
Wait, hold on. If running is the literal medicine that fixes their dopamine deficiency and unjams their glutamate receptors, why would a clinician restrict it? Wouldn't a 2-hour run provide more medicine and faster brain repair than a 30-minute run? It feels totally counterintuitive to restrict the cure.
It seems counterintuitive until you remember how tolerance works. If you flood the brain with massive amounts of endorphins and dopamine for 2 hours every single day, the brain adapts by downregulating receptors again. You're just recreating the exact same chemical flood that the drugs caused.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
During early recovery, structured training boundaries are absolutely vital to allow the brain to heal slowly and sustainably.
So what are the actual clinical boundaries? How do you properly dose running for a recovering addict?
The protocol typically caps training sessions at 30 to 60 minutes maximum during the early stages of recovery.
Wow. 30 minutes for someone who wants to be an ultra runner is agonizingly short. They're barely warming up.
It has to be short. You have to force the brain to adapt to a healthy simmer without relying on an extreme dopamine flood. You are teaching the nervous system that it can feel good without having to go to the absolute limit. Additionally, clinicians mandate 2 non-negotiable rest days per week.
Non-negotiable.
Not optional. They are scheduled into the calendar as concrete medical appointments. And perhaps most importantly, athletes are prescribed alternative non-compulsive physical movements.
What does non-compulsive movement look like?
It means activities that keep the body moving, but strip away all the metrics that feed obsession. Things like kayaking, dancing, stand-up paddleboarding, or just taking a slow hike in the woods with family.
So no Strava.
Exactly. Activities where you do not track calorie expenditure, you do not wear a heart rate monitor, you do not log the mileage on an app. It is purely experiential. It teaches the recovering brain that physical movement can be joyful, playful, and social, rather than just a metric-driven punishment or a solitary mechanism for emotional escape.
That is fascinating. It sounds like you are actively teaching the brain how to enjoy a quiet, steady burn, rather than always needing a massive, chaotic explosion of fireworks.
That is exactly the goal. You are rebuilding the capacity for quiet contentment.
All right, so we've established the foundation. We have strategy 1, the internal identity shift, and strategy 2, the strict clinical boundaries to prevent exercise from becoming a new weapon of self-destruction. But what happens in the trenches? How do these athletes handle the acute, real-time triggers? The terrifying moments when the craving for a specific substance hits them like a freight train on a Tuesday afternoon.
That's where we get into the tactical interventions.
Yeah, right. This brings us to strategies specifically targeting physical cravings, starting with strategy 3, conquering smoking and nicotine addiction, and then strategy 4, defeating gambling. Let's start with smoking. Nicotine is notoriously one of the most difficult chemicals to kick.
It is incredibly tenacious, primarily because smoking is deeply tied to both biological dependency and highly ingrained tactile behavioral habits. When an addict is trying to quit nicotine, the sensory and social cues are massive triggers.
Like just holding something in your hand.
Exactly. The feeling of holding a cigarette between the fingers, the oral fixation, the established routine of stepping outside for a 5-minute smoke break when you're stressed, these are deep neural grooves.
So how do you disrupt those grooves in the moment?
One very practical, clinically supported tool is tactile anchoring.
Tactile anchoring, like giving the hands a physical distraction.
Exactly. It is a grounding technique. Clinicians often suggest keeping a simple, thick elastic band around the wrist. When a severe, acute craving for nicotine hits, the individual snaps or plays with the elastic band.
That seems so simple, though.
It seems overly simplistic, but it occupies the hands, provides a mild, immediate sensory input to the nervous system, and redirects the immediate psychological urge. It acts as a cognitive bridge, distracting the brain for the 3 to 5 minutes it takes for an acute craving to peak and subside.
But beyond the rubber band, running itself actually provides a massive built-in deterrent to smoking, doesn't it? The sources referred to this as a somatic mismatch.
Yes. A somatic mismatch occurs when a new, highly valued behavior fundamentally clashes with the physical reality of the old addiction. When a heavy smoker begins an endurance running program, they are forced to confront the physiological damage of their habit in a very acute, unavoidable way.
Right. There was an entire Reddit thread where ex-smokers who became runners talked about this exact phenomenon. When you try to run even a single mile after smoking a pack a day for years, you can't hide from the damage. Your lungs are physically burning. You are coughing up thick phlegm. You are desperately, painfully short of breath.
Yeah, your body's screaming at you.
The running actively reveals the severe lung damage. It takes the abstract, distant medical concept of, smoking is bad for your long-term health and turns it into an immediate, highly painful physical reality in the present moment.
And that somatic mismatch becomes a remarkably powerful internal motivator. Because as they stick with the running, week after week, their cardiovascular capacity slowly begins to improve. Their resting heart rate drops. The alveoli in their lungs begin to clear. Suddenly they realize they can breathe deeply on a climb.
They can actually smell the pine trees on the trail instead of stale smoke.
Right. They feel energized instead of lethargic. The physical rewards of running become a biological reinforcement to stay smoke-free. The intense desire to protect their newfound fitness and lung capacity outweighs the temporary craving for a cigarette.
That makes perfect sense. The body essentially polices itself. Now let's pivot to strategy 4, which is a completely different beast. Defeating gambling addiction. This one is fascinating to me because it doesn't involve ingesting a chemical. There is no substance entering the bloodstream. Yet, pathological gambling destroys lives, bankrupts families, and drives people to suicide just as thoroughly as heroin. It absolutely does. Pathological gambling is a severe behavioral addiction driven by the unpredictable nature of the reward. It relies on what neuroscientists call pathological phasic dopamine spikes.
Can you break that down? What is a phasic spike?
Imagine standing at a roulette wheel or hitting a button on a slot machine. The brain doesn't just release dopamine when you win the bet. The highest surge of dopamine actually occurs during the anticipation of the unknown outcome.
So while the wheel is spinning, yes. While the wheel is spinning, the brain is flooded. It is the uncertainty, the intermittent reinforcement that hooks the brain so deeply. Over time, this constant chaotic spiking severely impairs the prefrontal cortex, the CEO we talked about earlier, that is responsible for value-based decision-making, risk assessment, and impulse control.
The clinical sources mentioned an inverted U-shaped model to explain why this happens. Let's dig into that because I want to make sure I understand how dopamine can actually ruin cognitive function.
It is a foundational concept in neuroscience. Imagine a graph shaped like an upside-down U. The vertical y-axis is your cognitive performance and executive control. The horizontal x-axis is your dopamine and arousal levels.
Okay, I have the graph in my head.
If you are on the far left side of the curve, your dopamine is too low. You are bored, lethargic, unmotivated. Your cognitive control is poor because you don't care. As your dopamine increases, you move up the curve to the peak. The peak of the inverted U is the sweet spot. This is the flow state. Your dopamine is perfectly balanced, you are highly focused, and your prefrontal cortex is making brilliant, rational decisions.
That is where we all want to live.
Exactly. But what happens if you keep dumping dopamine into the system? You slide down the far right side of the curve. Too much dopamine completely overwhelms the prefrontal cortex. Cognitive control collapses. You enter a state of chaotic, impulsive panic. Pathological gambling blasts the brain way off the optimal peak of that U-shape and traps the addict on the far right side, where impulsive, destructive decisions are made.
To pull someone back from that chaotic edge, the clinical strategy involves two distinct steps. Absolute self-exclusion to create immediate friction, and then restructuring the focus. We see this vividly in the autobiographical story of Jack Scott.
Yes, his story is intense.
Jack is an elite British ultrarunner, but in his early 20s, he battled a severe consuming addiction to high-stakes online sports and political gambling. He described the gambling world as murky, dingy, and dangerous, and full of absolute misery.
And how did he initially break out of that highly accessible digital trap?
He used a strict self-exclusion protocol called GamStop. It is a service in the UK that literally physically blocks your devices and your identity from accessing any online betting sites. It creates an immediate, insurmountable wall of friction. You can't just impulsively place a massive bet on your phone in a moment of weakness at 2:00 a.m.
That friction is absolutely vital. It breaks the immediate action reward loop. It gives the prefrontal cortex a few seconds to boot up and realize what is happening. But you cannot just build a wall and leave a void behind it. Nature abhors a vacuum, and an addicted brain abhors boredom. If you don't fill the void, the addict will just find a way around the wall.
Which is exactly where the running came in for Jack Scott. By blocking the avenue for gambling, he channeled his obsessive, singular intensity into endurance sports. And not just casual jogging, he poured his energy into breaking course records at the Winter Spine Race.
Oh, that race is brutal.
For context, the Winter Spine Race is a 268-mile non-stop foot race along the Pennine Way in Britain in the dead of winter. You are carrying your own survival gear, navigating through bogs, snow, and freezing winds. It is insane.
And biologically, substituting the chaotic gambling with this brutal endurance structure makes perfect sense. By engaging in long, highly structured, predictable endurance training, he is naturally restoring his dopaminergic baseline. Running provides clear, linear goals. You put in the miles, you adapt, you get the fitness. There is no chaotic unpredictability.
It's just hard work.
Right. This structured, delayed gratification pursuit slowly pulls the brain from the chaotic right side of the inverted U shape back up to the peak of optimal cognitive control. It rebuilds the prefrontal cortex's capacity to handle boredom and delay rewards.
Jack Scott said something really profound about this transition that perfectly mirrors what we are talking about. He said, "I've been to hell and back and nothing good came of it. Now I've got an opportunity to make my own path with the same intensity, but there's hope and there's light. He didn't lose his intensity. He didn't numb out his obsessive drive. He just aimed it at something pure that yielded physical health instead of financial ruin.
It is a brilliant real-world example of redirecting a powerful biological drive.
Okay, we have covered drugs, alcohol, nicotine, and gambling. With all of those, the ultimate goal is absolute abstinence, right? You block the website, you throw away the cigarettes, you pour the alcohol down the drain. But what happens when the addiction is tied to something you literally cannot abstain from? You can live the rest of your life without a drop of whiskey or a spin of the roulette wheel, but you have to eat every single day to survive.
This brings us to a highly complex and deeply debated area of behavioral change, which is processed food addiction and emotional eating. Strategies 5 and 6.
I think a lot of people might instinctively roll their eyes at the term food addiction, assuming it just means someone likes chocolate a little too much or lacks self-discipline. But the clinical research in our sources paints a terrifying, completely different picture.
It is a fiercely researched clinical condition known as ultra-processed food addiction, or UPFA. To understand it, we classify human diets using the NotesThe scale, which categorizes food based entirely on the level of industrial processing.
Okay, how does the scale work?
Category 1 is whole foods: apples, raw nuts, fresh fish. Category 4 is ultra-processed foods. These are things like packaged snack cakes, sugary sodas, fast food french fries, and frozen pizzas. It is vital to understand that Category 4 items are not really food in the biological sense. They are highly engineered formulations of industrial ingredients designed in laboratories.
They are engineered by food scientists to hit what is called the bliss point, right?
Exactly. They are meticulously manufactured to be hyperpalatable. They combine specific ratios of refined fats, sugars, and sodium that simply do not exist in nature. When consumed, these engineered formulations trigger massive, unnatural surges of dopamine and endogenous opioids in the brain's reward pathways. They completely override the body's natural appetite and satiety controls. Biologically, fMRI brain scans show that these foods hijack the reward circuitry in a manner remarkably similar to a dose of cocaine.
This brings up a massive paradox that I want to push you on. What does this neurobiological reality mean for the wildly popular concept of intuitive eating?
Yeah.
Because if you go online right now, dietitians and nutritionists are constantly promoting intuitive eating. The idea of rejecting toxic diet culture, honoring your hunger, and giving yourself unconditional permission to eat whatever you want, with the assumption that your body has innate wisdom and will naturally find its healthy balance. But if your body and brain are biologically addicted to engineered, hyperpalatable chemicals that actively short-circuit your satiety signals, isn't telling a food addict to eat intuitively exactly like telling a severe alcoholic to drink intuitively? It seems like a recipe for disaster.
You have just hit on the exact dialectical tension that is tearing the nutrition field apart right now. Traditional intuitive eating is a fantastic, necessary, and deeply healing philosophy for chronic dieters or individuals recovering from restrictive eating disorders like anorexia. It helps heal their psychological relationship with food. But the clinical consensus is emerging that for someone with true neurobiologically ingrained ultra-processed food addiction, traditional intuitive eating can be catastrophically harmful. Because their satiety signaling is biochemically broken, their biology will never tell them to stop eating the engineered food. Their intuition has been hijacked by the bliss point.
So how do you fix it? You can't just tell an ultra runner to stop eating. They are burning 5,000 calories a week in training. They have to fuel, which leads to strategy 5.
Yes. The clinical strategy implemented for athletes in recovery is called modified intuitive eating. We take principle 3 of traditional intuitive eating, which is unconditional permission to eat, and we heavily modify it. The athlete is granted absolute unconditional permission to eat whole, minimally processed food.
As much as they want.
They can eat as much as they want until they're full. However, they maintain the strict, pre-planned autonomy to consciously opt out of the specific engineered trigger foods that they know hijack their brain's reward circuitry.
So practically speaking, you can eat as many sweet potatoes, chicken breasts, bowls of oatmeal, and avocados as you physically want to fuel your 50-mile training week. But the frozen pizza, the the manufactured cookies, and the soda are a hard, non-negotiable no.
Exactly. And the psychological framing here is crucial. Avoiding ultra-processed foods in this context is not about a fear of weight gain or wanting to look a certain way, which is the toxic focus of diet culture.
Right. It's not about being skinny.
Not at all. It is entirely about protecting fragile brain chemistry. It is about wanting fewer obsessive thoughts. It is about not wanting to feel out of control or defeated by binge behaviors. By abstaining from the engineered triggers, you allow the highly sensitive gut-brain axis time to heal and recalibrate its natural hunger signals.
Which leads right into the dietary mechanics of this, strategy 6. To transition an athlete away from hedonic eating, which is eating purely for pleasure, dopamine, and emotional numbness, and move them toward homeostatic eating, which is eating to properly fuel the physical machinery of the body, you have to start by stabilizing their blood sugar.
Blood glucose stabilization is the absolute bedrock of recovery from food addiction. When you eat ultra-processed sugary foods, your blood glucose spikes dramatically. The body panics and releases a massive wave of insulin to clear the sugar. This results in a severe blood sugar crash.
And then what happens?
That sudden crash triggers the amygdala to initiate intense physiological panic, creating vicious cravings for more fast sugar to fix the crash. It is a biological roller coaster that completely strips the athlete of their willpower.
So the daily habit to break this roller coaster is something called the whole food trio. You basically have to pair 3 specific macronutrients at almost every single meal to flatten the curve.
Right.
You need high quality proteins like eggs, wild-caught fish, or lentils. You pair that with fiber-rich complex carbohydrates like steel-cut oats, quinoa, or brown rice. And you add healthy fats like extra virgin olive oil, walnuts, or avocados.
The magic of this specific macronutrient combination is that it significantly slows down gastric emptying. The protein and fat act like a dam, ensuring a very slow, steady, sustained release of glucose from the complex carbohydrates into the bloodstream over several hours.
So you don't get the spike.
Exactly. By maintaining that perfectly stable energy level, you completely eliminate the rapid sugar crashes that trigger hedonic hunger and compulsive relapse. When the body begins to deeply trust that it is properly fueled and blood sugar is stable, the desperate, obsessive cravings for ultra-processed foods slowly begin to diminish. The biological panic subsides.
That makes total sense on a physiological level. Fix the blood sugar, fix the cravings. But what about the psychological side? Because we all know that even with a perfect, pristine, whole food diet that keeps blood sugar perfectly flat, a severe emotional event can still completely derail an athlete. A bad breakup, a stressful day at work, a wave of depression. How do athletes manage that?
This brings us to strategy 7, a highly specialized skill set called mindful distress tolerance for emotional eating. Emotional overeating is fundamentally a maladaptive coping mechanism. It is using food not as cellular fuel, but as an easily accessible drug to soothe difficult emotional states, stress, anger, profound loneliness, boredom, or anxiety.
If I am listening to this, how do I actually tell the difference in my own body between genuine physical hunger, because I just ran 15 miles, and emotional hunger because I had a terrible day at work and my boss yelled at me? Sometimes they feel exactly the same.
It is very hard to distinguish in the moment, but clinically, there are distinct trackable markers. Physical or homeostatic hunger develops gradually over several hours. It is patient. Is also open to options. If you are truly physically hungry, an apple or a plate of leftover chicken sounds just as good as a sandwich. And most importantly, physical hunger stops when you're physically full. The stretch receptors in your stomach send a signal to the brain, you feel satisfied, and you stop eating.
And emotional hunger, how does that present?
Emotional or hedonic hunger hits instantly. It is urgent and demanding. It doesn't want options. It demands a highly specific ultra-processed food. You don't just want food. Your brain is screaming that you need a specific brand of chocolate chip cookies right this second.
I know that feeling all too well.
We all do. Furthermore, emotional eating completely overrides physical satiety signals. You will eat past the point of being full until you are physically uncomfortable or painfully stuffed. And the aftermath is never satisfaction. The aftermath of an emotional binge is intense guilt, deep shame, and self-criticism.
To combat this vicious cycle, the sources suggest implementing a daily habit called the diurnal food mood audit. This is basically keeping a very specific, granular journal to map the exact anatomy of your cravings. You track the sequence, trigger leads to thought, which leads to emotion, which leads to action.
Yes, it is about making the unconscious conscious. For example, the trigger is an argument with your spouse. The thought is, I am unlovable and this relationship is going to fail. The emotion is intense anxiety and deep sadness. The action is eating a pint of ice cream to numb the sadness. By forcing yourself to write this sequence down daily, you strip away the mystery. You begin to see the mechanical, predictable nature of your own behavioral loops.
But seeing the pattern on paper isn't always enough to stop it in the heat of the moment. When that emotional craving hits, the urge to numb out is completely overwhelming. You know you shouldn't do it, but the prefrontal cortex is offline.
Which is exactly why clinicians implement the 5-minute cognitive delay. When an acute, intense craving strikes, the athlete is trained to first stop and rate their hunger on a scale of 1 to 5. If they recognize through the markers that it is emotional hunger, they do not tell themselves no.
Why not just say no?
Because telling an addict no often just increases the psychological panic and intensifies the desire. It creates a restriction mindset. Instead, they tell themselves, not yet. They give themselves permission to have the food, but they implement a strict, non-negotiable 5-minute delay.
And what are they supposed to do during those 5 minutes? Just stare at the cookies and suffer?
No. They immediately engage in non-food distress tolerance. They change their physical state. They go for a brisk walk around the block. They put on noise-canceling headphones and listen to a specific emotionally engaging song. They practice box breathing, or they chug a large glass of cold water. 5 minutes sounds like nothing, but neurobiologically, it is an eternity. It's usually long enough for the acute emotional wave of the craving to peak and begin to subside.
It gives the prefrontal cortex time to reboot.
Exactly. It allows the CEO to come back online and say, okay, I am just incredibly stressed right now. Eating a box of cookies will not fix the stress. It will only add shame. Over time, successfully navigating this brief 5-minute window literally rewires the brain. It trains the nervous system to endure emotional discomfort without automatically reaching for a substance to numb it.
That is incredibly practical. Rate, delay, distract, reassess. All right, so far we have covered some deeply introspective, highly individual strategies. We talked about internal identity shifts, strict personal diet rules, private journaling, cognitive delays in your own head. But addiction thrives in the dark. It thrives in isolation. To build a timeline for real, sustained, lifelong change, the athlete has to build a safety net outside of their own head. You cannot do this alone.
You absolutely cannot. Addiction is a profoundly isolating disease. Whether it is hiding empty vodka bottles in the recycling bin, sneaking into the bathroom to gamble on a phone, or secretly binge eating in your car before you go into the house, the disease forces the individual into intense secrecy and shame. To break the cycle permanently, you must focus on strategy 8, therapeutic communities. You have to actively replace the chemical hook of the substance with the biological reward of human connection.
A perfect, tangible example of this from our sources is a massive gym network called the Phoenix. It was founded by a guy named Scott Strud, who is a former severe cocaine addict. He got sober, but he realized that traditional talk therapy wasn't enough for him to stay sober. He needed a completely new peer group that didn't revolve around bars or drug culture. So he started a gym where the only membership fee required to walk through the doors is 48 hours of continuous sobriety.
It is a truly brilliant public health model. The Phoenix offers CrossFit classes, boxing, yoga, and trail running groups. It leverages the powerful neurobiology of group exercise, the shared dopamine, the endorphins, the synchronous movement, but it combines it with deep group accountability.
Because everyone there gets it.
Exactly. When a recovering addict is struggling on a Friday night, they aren't just calling a sponsor in a sterile room. They are showing up to sweat, lift heavy weights, and suffer on a run alongside people who completely understand the exact darkness they are fighting.
The story of Katra Corbett highlights the power of this community beautifully. Katra was a go-go dancer suffering from severe clinical depression and a terrifying meth and cocaine addiction. She was entirely lost in that dark world. But she eventually found the trail running community, and it entirely changed the trajectory of her life. She has now run over 250 ultramarathons and completed 100-mile races over 125 times. She explicitly credits the health-conscious, incredibly supportive, and non-judgmental running community with saving her life. They provided the deep social connection and acceptance she used to seek in drug dens, but in a healthy, life-affirming environment on the trails.
The social community keeps them emotionally accountable, which is vital. But when you were dealing with athletes pushing extreme limits, we also need strict clinical accountability. Which brings us to strategy 9, the physical safety net, specifically focusing on a condition called REDs.
REDs. That stands for relative energy deficiency in sport.
Yes. Because ultramarathon training requires massive, sustained energy expenditure, sometimes burning upwards of 1,000 calories an hour during a race. Athletes in recovery are at a uniquely high risk for chronic underfueling. Often, the obsessive nature of their previous addiction can seamlessly transfer into an obsession with leanness, rigid control over their diet, or reaching a specific race weight. This leads to severe, prolonged caloric restriction.
And that's dangerous.
Extremely. When an athlete consistently burns far more energy than they consume, their body enters a state of panic and starts shutting down non-essential biological functions just to survive the daily runs.
I want to try an analogy here to explain REDs. It's like a major city grid during a severe winter power shortage. The brain is the mayor of the city, and it looks at the limited power supply, the limited calories coming in, and says, okay, we only have enough electricity to keep the vital infrastructure running, keep the hospitals open, which is the heart, keep the water pumps going, which are the lungs. But to do that, the mayor has to force rolling blackouts across the rest of the city. So shut down the schools, which is the body's ability to rebuild bone density, shut down the parks and entertainment, which is the reproductive system and hormone production. The body is literally cannibalizing its own long-term infrastructure just to keep the legs moving on the trail today.
That is exactly what is happening on a cellular level. It is biological cannibalism. RED severely impairs endocrine function, it crashes testosterone and estrogen, it drops bone mineral density, causing devastating stress fractures, and it severely impacts psychological well-being, often leading right back into depression. To prevent this, clinical sports medicine teams utilize a specific screening protocol called the International Olympic Committee's REDs Clinical Assessment Tool version 2.
How does that screening actually work in practice? Is it just a questionnaire?
It is a comprehensive medical evaluation that looks at blood panels, bone density scans, and psychological markers. It categorizes the athlete's risk into a clear traffic light system: green, yellow, orange, and red. Green means optimal metabolic health and full training is allowed. Yellow indicates moderate risk, maybe some minor unexplained weight fluctuations or mild menstrual irregularities for female athletes. Yellow requires close dietary adjustments and monitoring by a dietitian.
But what if the clinical markers place them in orange or red?
If they hit orange, which means clear symptoms like recurrent stress fractures, chronic fatigue, or a suppressed resting metabolic rate training volume and intensity, must be immediately non-negotiably reduced by 20 to 30%. If they hit red extreme risk, presenting with severe bradycardia, which is a dangerously low heart rate, dangerous BMI drops, or severe psychological distress, they must be strictly and immediately removed from all training and competition. The clinical team steps in to ensure that the very tool of their psychological recovery running doesn't become the instrument of their physical destruction.
This leads us perfectly into our final topic, strategy 10, the multidisciplinary approach. How do we tie all these threads together? The daily nutritional boundaries, the cognitive delays, the group fitness community, the REDs, clinical screenings. How do you build a cohesive aftercare program and a lifelong roadmap for the person listening to this?
The final strategy emphasizes multidisciplinary integration. Active, early addiction recovery layered on top of the physical demands of ultra-endurance training is simply too complex for any one person to manage alone. The gold standard in sports medicine right now is building a coordinated clinical team. You need a primary care physician monitoring systemic health and REDs markers. You need a sports psychologist providing cognitive behavioral therapy to manage the emotional triggers. You need a registered sports dietitian ensuring the energy balance is maintained to protect bone health. And you need a running coach intelligently managing the physical load to prevent compulsive overtraining.
But if you have this whole team of experts, they don't just hand the recovering addict a rigid list of rules and say, follow these or you're out, right?
Right.
Because an addict's brain naturally wants to rebel against rigid authority.
That is a critical point. Dictating rules to an addict almost always backfires. Instead, the clinical team uses a highly specific communication technique called motivational interviewing.
How does that differ from just giving advice?
Instead of telling the athlete what to do, the clinicians ask guiding, open-ended questions. They help the athlete verbally connect their deeply held long-term life goals with their daily commitment to sobriety. Through interviewing, they help the athlete realize on their own that their intense desire to finish a 100-mile race or their desire to be a present, healthy parent is directly tied to their daily choice to stay sober, to eat the complex carbohydrates, and to rest when they are injured. It creates internal motivation rather than external compliance.
The sources drew a really interesting comparison between traditional recovery programs and endurance sports. They called it the 12 steps versus 12 million steps.
It highlights a beautiful synergy. Traditional 12-step programs like AA or NA are phenomenal for the psychological, self-disciplinary, and social sides of recovery. They force honesty and accountability, but they don't always address the physiological damage to the brain's dopamine pathways. Running, on the other hand, directly addresses the physiological side. It repairs the hardware.
Timothy Olson is an amazing example here. He went from heavy, destructive drug and alcohol addiction in his youth to eventually becoming a 2-time champion of the Western States 100, which is the most prestigious ultramarathon in the world. But he didn't just run his way out of addiction. He integrated daily mindfulness, meditation, and deep psychological work into his intense training blocks. The running acted as a powerful physiological detox and dopamine regulator, while the mindfulness provided the necessary psychological healing. The two approaches work best in tandem.
And as for the timeline, if you are listening to this and wondering how long it takes to feel normal, the clinical data provides a very clear roadmap. The first 2 weeks of running for a recovering addict are incredibly, profoundly difficult.
Because the satisfaction is entirely delayed. With drugs or alcohol, you take a hit or take a drink, and the dopamine reward is instant. Zero effort, massive reward. With running, the first 2 weeks just feel like pure suffering. Your lungs burn, your joints ache, you are exhausted, and your brain is screaming at you to stop and just get an easier dopamine hit.
Precisely. The brain is throwing a temper tantrum for the easy chemical fix. But if the individual can endure that initial massive friction, neuroplasticity begins to take over. Around the 100-day mark of sustained sobriety and regular aerobic exercise, we see a significant measurable repair in the brain's reward pathways. The baseline dopamine levels begin to rise naturally. The density of D2 receptors improves.
So maybe that's why I don't, I guess, have any reaction to it. But, I'm not sure. But anyways, yeah, it's been going good. So kind of cut that out, and after doing the numbers on that morning breakfast, it was probably pretty ridiculous anyways. I think I was eating close to 2,000 calories. So it had a lot of whole foods in it, or it just had nothing but whole foods in it, but it had lots of nuts and seeds, which really add up. 1/4 of any nut really can get up to 200 calories in just 1/4 of a cup. And then if you times that by 8 or 9 different nuts and seeds, then yeah, it can add up quick. Anyways, it's probably best that I don't do that anymore. So I kind of shifted. So now I'm kind of doing chicken, olive oil, salt, pepper, garlic, and kale, and cocoa and cacao, the two there. Just kind of simple, I guess. And blueberry blueberry, yeah. So that's what I've been eating lately in the mornings, and we'll see how that goes. Obviously, it might not taste that good, although it does taste okay, you know, I think. It's doable for sure for a lifetime, I think. So that's the breakfast so far, and it's been working. I'm not sure what I'd do when I start training. If I add, I'd probably add a banana to that for more carbs, but or banana and peanut butter for more carbs and fat. But for now, that's what I'm doing. Just before training or anything like that. Anyways, yeah. Don't know if I have any other updates.